Throughout history, tragic events involving world leaders have always left traces of doubt. The assassinations of powerful figures, such as presidents, often seem to involve something beyond mere isolated acts. The details that emerge after these incidents suggest that greater forces, hidden in the shadows, may have influenced or even orchestrated every move. Elite groups with silent power, secret orders that control the fate of nations, or agendas masked by democratic ideals. Could it be that the world is under the rule of something unseen? Accounts from witnesses, leaked documents, and disturbing coincidences lead to the inevitable question: were these tragedies truly the work of lone individuals, or is there something far more sinister behind these actions? After all, who could take down a leader except those who already hold invisible control over the world? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just a click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube share these videos with more people, and it allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. In the world of politics, the most important decisions are often attributed to public figures like presidents and prime ministers. However, many theorists suggest that these figures are merely representatives of hidden interests, manipulated by elite groups operating far from the spotlight. These secret societies, some with alleged centuries-old origins, are said to influence the fate of nations and even decide matters of life and death. But who are these groups, and how do they wield such immense power? One frequently cited example is the Bilderberg Group, an annual conference that brings together some of the most influential people in the world. Officially claiming to discuss global issues, the absolute secrecy of these meetings raises suspicions. What happens behind those closed doors? And why are the details inaccessible to the public? Another significant name is the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, a US-based organization that holds considerable sway over American foreign policy. Many of its members have held strategic positions in government and major corporations. Are these connections mere coincidences or evidence of a larger coordination of power? Throughout history, leaders who have challenged or exposed these hidden forces have faced fatal consequences. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated after making decisions that opposed the economic interests of the elites of his time. Decades later, John F. Kennedy, a vocal critic of secret societies, was killed in an attack that still raises questions. Is it plausible that lone assassins could carry out such meticulously planned acts? The alleged methods of these secret orders include economic manipulation, media control, and even the creation of artificial crises to shape public narratives. When diplomacy is insufficient, more extreme methods are used to remove obstacles. How far does the reach of these organizations extend? Additionally, there are accounts of more enigmatic groups, such as the Illuminati, often linked to governments and global economies. Although widely discredited, these accounts persist due to mysterious symbols found on currency, monuments, and political speeches. Patterns also emerge when analyzing those involved in historical assassinations. Lee Harvey Oswald, accused of killing JFK, and John Wilkes Booth, responsible for Lincoln's death, have connections and behaviors suggesting something beyond isolated actions. Who truly controls these agents? The actions of governments after these events are also telling. Classified documents and incomplete investigations suggest that those involved may be as vulnerable as the victims themselves. In modern times, technological advances have expanded the possibilities for surveillance and control. With tools capable of predicting and influencing events, groups with access to these technologies could consolidate agendas with precision. But who ensures these tools are in the right hands? The role of money is equally fundamental. Families like the Rockefellers and Rothschilds are often cited as financiers of these operations. Could economic influence be the key to uncovering these connections? These events don't just belong to history, they shape the future of entire nations. But a closer analysis suggests that true power does not lie with those we see on stage. Who then pulls the strings? When examining events leading to the assassinations of world leaders, a disturbing pattern emerges: unexpected connections between the perpetrators and groups operating in the shadows. From mysterious contacts to enigmatic histories, the pieces often point to something much larger. What do these connections mean, and who might be behind them. Lee Harvey Oswald, accused of assassinating President John F. Kennedy, is a prime example. Despite being portrayed as a lone wolf, his trajectory raises many questions. He lived in the Soviet Union during the Cold War, maintained contradictory ties with pro- and anti-Cuba groups, and claimed to be a target of persecution. Could these isolated elements indicate a more complex plot? John Wilkes Booth, responsible for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, also raises suspicions. Though known as an actor, Booth had connections with groups sympathetic to the Confederacy. Records suggest his participation in meetings where conspiracies against Lincoln were discussed. Were these gatherings merely extremist Southern circles, or were external influences shaping the events? Another significant example is Gavrilo Princip, whose attack on Archduke Franz Ferdinand sparked World War I. Princip was a member of the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist group. However, the funding and execution of the attack suggest a more elaborate logistics network than a small organization could manage alone. Was the Black Hand manipulated by greater powers? Even in recent times, similar patterns emerge. The 1986 assassination of Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme is surrounded by theories pointing to an international group unhappy with his pacifist and anti-nuclear stance. The complexity of the crime indicates resources and planning beyond the capabilities of an ordinary assassin. These hidden connections often involve intelligence agencies. Oswald, for example, was under surveillance by the FBI and CIA before Kennedy's assassination. Yet he managed to approach the president and carry out the crime. Was this a failure of the agencies, or was something deeper at play? Another recurring element is the silencing of witnesses. Individuals capable of uncovering the connections behind these assassins often meet premature deaths. Dorothy Kilgallen, an investigative journalist, mysteriously died while probing the JFK case. The disappearance of evidence and the lack of plausible explanations suggest these deaths are not mere coincidences. Technological and psychological advances also raise questions. Rumors about government projects like MKUltra, which explored mind control, suggest that assassins could be programmed to carry out missions without full awareness of their actions. Could this explain the peculiar behaviors of many involved in these events? Moreover, the methods of execution often display a level of precision that challenges the idea of solitary actions. Kennedy's death, for instance, involved precise shots fired within a short time frame, raising suspicions of multiple shooters or a much more elaborate plan. Financial connections also deserve attention. Many individuals involved in historical assassinations had unstable financial histories, making them susceptible to external pressures. Could these individuals have been easy targets for recruitment into secret operations? If these hidden connections are real, they suggest that no world leader is truly safe. But what would be the ultimate purpose of these organizations? How far would they go to ensure their objectives are achieved? Throughout history, some presidents have dared to challenge the systems surrounding them. These decisions, often contrary to the interests of powerful elites, ultimately resulted in their deaths. Were these tragedies simply the result of natural political disagreements, or were they clear messages sent by those holding true power? Abraham Lincoln was one of the first leaders to face such a fate. During his presidency, Lincoln confronted a civil war that brought the United States to the brink of collapse. His decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation directly challenged the economic structures of the slave-holding South and, consequently, the interests of powerful financiers. John Wilkes Booth, the man who assassinated Lincoln, may have been merely the final agent of a much larger conspiracy network. Isn't it curious that Lincoln dreamed of his own death just days before the fateful event? Decades later, John F. Kennedy would become the center of another monumental tragedy. Kennedy defied established orders by openly criticizing the military-industrial complex and suggesting a re-evaluation of CIA operations. Additionally, his intent to dismantle the Federal Reserve and end the Vietnam War was seen as an act of rebellion against the financial and political interests of the time's elites. In Dallas in 1963, his life was taken, and to this day, the circumstances of his death continue to raise unanswered questions. After all, how could such a well-protected leader become the target of a successful attack? Garfield and McKinley are less remembered, but equally intriguing examples. President James A. Garfield, assassinated in 1881, advocated for political reform that threatened established interests. William McKinley, on the other hand, was killed in 1901 under circumstances many believe were tied to his defense of the gold standard, which irritated corporations seeking greater control over the financial system. A disturbing pattern emerges when examining the motives and contexts of these deaths. All these leaders challenged systems that benefited those with silent power. Whether by combating slavery, criticizing economic systems, or questioning intelligence agencies, their actions threaten power networks that do not hesitate to eliminate obstacles. But how do these elites ensure their interests remain undisturbed again? The answer may lie in their ability to manipulate narratives. After Kennedy's death, for instance, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, yet the public remained skeptical. Could this indicate a deliberate attempt to cover something larger? If not, why do so many contradictory pieces of evidence continue to emerge? It is also important to note the role of the media. Major media conglomerates often shape public perception, presenting simplified or even manipulated versions of events. When world leaders disobey these elites' agendas, how does the media portray them? And when they are eliminated, what stories are used to justify their deaths? Another factor is the recurrence of symbols and patterns throughout these events. Many locations where the assassinations occurred are associated with numerology or architecture of hidden significance. For example, the location where Kennedy was killed, Dealey Plaza, is filled with symbols that theorists point to as indications of a larger plan. When defiant leaders are eliminated, what happens afterward? In many cases, their policies are reversed, benefiting exactly those who opposed their ideas. This was the case with Lincoln, whose successor was far more lenient with the southern states, and with Kennedy, whose vision of a less militarized world was replaced by an escalation of the Vietnam War. Is it a coincidence that their deaths align the course of politics with the interests of major economic groups? If these leaders were killed for challenging the system, what message does this send to other leaders in power? Perhaps the true weapon of these elites is not just the ability to eliminate, but to create an atmosphere of fear and submission. What president in their right mind would dare to follow in the footsteps of Lincoln or Kennedy, knowing the consequences? The power of secret societies is not limited to political actions or backstage control. It also manifests in symbols, monuments, and hidden codes spread throughout cities around the world. These signs, often ignored or seen as coincidences, may contain clues about the presence of these forces in history. Washington, D.C. is a frequently cited example. The city's layout and the positioning of important monuments suggest geometric patterns that some say resemble symbols used by Freemasonry. The Capitol, aligned with the White House and the Washington Monument, forms an incomplete pentagram. Is this organization a mere coincidence or a reflection of deeper intent? Obelisks, structures originating from Egypt, appear in various modern capitals. The Washington Monument, the Luxor Obelisk in Paris, and the Vatican Obelisk are associated with esoteric concepts of power and divine connection. The insistence on replicating these elements suggests a message intended for the few while remaining invisible to most. Why do these obelisks appear everywhere? Just decoration, or is there a meaning we shouldn't ignore? Beyond structures, symbols appear in documents and currency. The US $1 bill, for example, features the all-seeing eye, associated with both Freemasonry and the Illuminati. The Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages, reinforces theories about a global plan to establish a new world order. Are these elements merely artistic traits or deliberate messages? In Europe, cities like Paris also display structures evoking occult symbolism. Monuments such as the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower have alignments that theorists claim hold esoteric meanings. Are these alignments an artistic expression or signs of an invisible order influencing even architecture? Historical sites like Stonehenge also feature in theories about secret society rituals. Considered a site of power since antiquity, there is speculation that it is still used in ceremonies by mysterious groups. Even in assassination investigations, curious symbols emerge. Dealey Plaza, where Kennedy was killed, is associated with numerology and sacred geometry. The obelisk near the site reinforces suspicions that the symbolism may have been deliberate. But why leave such visible clues? Some theories suggest that these symbols are not merely internal messages but declarations of power. The presence of such elements in public spaces would indicate that these forces are always present, even if invisible. Could this be a reminder to those who think about challenging their authority that the consequences are inevitable? Critics, however, argue that these symbols are taken out of context. Freemasonry, for example, claims its emblems have only philosophical and spiritual meanings. But if that's the case, why do so many historically impactful events seem connected to these elements? Perhaps the greatest mystery is the inability of the majority to notice or believe in the significance of these symbols. Is this the result of a deliberate campaign to discredit them, or simply a reflection of the complexity of the codes used? The hidden messages in streets, monuments, and documents seem to point to something greater. Are we truly seeing what lies before our eyes, or are these symbols merely fragments of a puzzle we may never fully understand? Behind major historical events, there are always those who benefit from chaos. Revolutions, wars, and the assassinations of world leaders often generate political and economic instability that seems to favor specific interests. But is chaos merely a side effect, or something deliberately created by invisible hands controlling the backstage of power? After John F. Kennedy's assassination, the United States plunged into a series of conflicts and crises, including the escalation of the Vietnam War. Arms companies and major corporations earned exorbitant profits from the war, while the public was kept in a constant state of fear. The link between tragic events and financial gains raises disturbing questions about the true objectives of the elites supposedly governing nations. Why does it seem like every time something tragic happens, someone is ready to profit from the misfortune? Coincidence or plan? The First World War, sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is another notable example. The war reshaped Europe's map and favored the rise of new economic and industrial powers. International banks and arms industries thrived while millions of lives were lost. What began as an isolated act of violence quickly escalated into a war of global proportions. Was this development truly an inevitable consequence, or was it carefully manipulated to serve specific interests? The pattern repeats throughout history. When leaders are removed, the resulting power vacuum can be exploited in various ways. In 1981, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated amidst intense political tensions. His death allowed new interests to take control of Egyptian politics, redirecting alliances and strategic resources. The resulting instability benefited both regional actors and international powers. Secret societies and elite groups are often cited as the true architects of chaos. Manipulating crises not only diverts attention from their actions behind the scenes, but also opens doors to implement changes that benefit their interests. The September 11, 2001, attacks are frequently referenced by theorists. The incident triggered a chain reaction culminating in wars in the Middle East, increases in military budgets, and drastic changes in global surveillance policies. The economic and political impact was monumental, but corporations involved in reconstruction and national security emerged as clear winners. Chaos also serves as a tool for control. When a population is preoccupied with crises, it becomes easier to implement policies that would typically face resistance. After the assassination of leaders, governments often pass emergency laws that consolidate power or expand the reach of specific institutions. In the case of Abraham Lincoln, his death amidst the Civil War allowed Reconstruction policies to be conducted in ways that benefited Northern economic interests, often at the expense of Southern states. The economic impacts of tragic events are often not immediate, but become evident over time. After World War II, Europe's reconstruction resulted in massive profits for American companies participating in the Marshall Plan. The collapse of political systems created by assassinated leaders frequently paves the way for a new economic order favoring specific groups. Another crucial aspect is the manipulation of public opinion. When fear and uncertainty set in, the masses are more susceptible to accepting simplified narratives or solutions proposed by elites. Controlling the media and spreading targeted information allows the architects of chaos to maintain control over how events are perceived. The death of charismatic leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. often generates waves of public outrage, but also creates openings for new figures or agendas to occupy the political space. These elites rarely act alone. International networks, including corporations, banks, and think tanks, often work together to ensure that the changes caused by tragic events are directed in favor of their interests. These collaborations are deliberate, planned, and executed with precision. While evidence of manipulation is widely debated, the results speak for themselves. Crises always create winners. The tragedies that shake the world rarely affect those operating in the shadows. On the contrary, these groups emerge even stronger, with greater influence and control. Chaos is not merely a state of disorder, but an opportunity carefully exploited by those who know how to shape the destiny of nations. While populations suffer the consequences, elites calculate their next moves, ensuring that, in the end, the balance always tips in their favor. In many cases involving the assassinations of world leaders, a disturbing pattern emerges. People with crucial information about the events often disappear or die under mysterious circumstances. These deaths, often classified as accidents, suicides, or coincidences, raise suspicions that inconvenient witnesses are systematically silenced to protect secrets that cannot be revealed. Do you really believe everyone who knew something important died by accident? Or was it a way to silence the right voices? One of the most well-known cases is that of Dorothy Kilgallen, an investigative journalist who claimed to have uncovered exclusive information about John F. Kennedy's assassination. She died under mysterious circumstances in 1965, shortly after confiding that she was about to publish a revealing story. Her death was declared an accidental overdose, but the disappearance of documents and drafts reinforces the suspicion that she knew too much. Another example is William Sullivan, a senior FBI official who began exposing the agency's controversial operations in the 1970s. Sullivan died in a hunting accident shortly before testifying in a government investigation. The timing and lack of clarity about the incident raised questions about the true cause of his death. Similar cases have occurred in other countries. After the assassination of Congo's President Patrice Lumumba in 1961, several individuals connected to the event disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. Reports indicate that international forces were involved in the crime, but the full connections remain obscure due to the silencing of key witnesses. Some deaths are preceded by changes in behavior or threats. Frank Olson, a scientist involved in U.S. government experiments, became a problem after questioning the projects he worked on. He died in 1953, falling from a hotel window. Later reports suggest Olson was drugged and pushed, but the case was never fully clarified. The manipulation of investigations is another recurring element. Individuals attempting to expose inconsistencies in official narratives face retaliation, such as discrediting campaigns or career losses. Jim Garrison, a prosecutor investigating the JFK case, faced massive resistance even when raising legitimate points about the involvement of powerful figures in the crime. Why are so many investigations interrupted or diverted from their objectives? Another troubling pattern involves suicides occurring at critical moments. Seth Rich, a Democratic National Committee staffer, was fatally shot in 2016 in what was initially treated as a robbery. However, theories suggest Rich had knowledge of sensitive information. The lack of clear evidence and silence around the case fuel suspicions. The connections between witnesses and secret societies appear in various accounts. Many of these individuals seem to stumble upon information exposing links between elites, political events, and hidden agendas. But why do those who know too much never manage to reveal the truth? Is the power of these forces so absolute that no one can face them? The speed with which these deaths are classified as accidents or suicides prevents deeper analysis. Independent investigations often encounter legal and political barriers, perpetuating a cycle in which those responsible remain untouchable. Could this pattern be a deliberate strategy to discourage others from following the same path? These silencing acts not only protect the guilty, but also reinforce the mystery. For the public, the lack of answers creates a sense of powerlessness, as if the truth is always out of reach. But to what extent do these silences shape the history we know? Control over the narrative is as important as power itself. Those who hold a monopoly on information seem to dictate the world's course, eliminating any threat to their dominance. Throughout history, tragic events involving world leaders continue to raise more questions than answers. The connections to secret societies, the patterns of chaos manipulation, and the systematic silencing of witnesses suggest that invisible forces shape the destiny of nations. These events are not merely isolated tragedies, but pieces of a much larger puzzle, where true power rarely occupies the spotlight. These theories lead us to question what we truly know about the events that define the course of history. Who decides who rises and who falls? Who pulls the strings that maintain order or create chaos? This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.